Hello and welcome back to the Catholic Founders Podcast, the place to learn how to truly be a Catholic entrepreneur and business owner. I'm your host, Silas Maynor, and today we are sharing the rest of our conversation with Alessandro DiSanto, the co-founder of Hallow. In case you missed it, our first episode was with him, and we just focused on how to pray as a Catholic entrepreneur. So we focus on even kind of how you should discern whether or not you're called to entrepreneurship, a number of the tools that you can use along that journey, how to pray and when you're successful, and we even discussed how to know and how to pray when it's time to hang it up. So really good episode. Check it out, number 1, if you haven't already. There's also a written version of this, kind of a guide if you prefer to read. Not my thing, but it's up to you. All right, in addition to that first episode, we actually recorded a lot more with him, so we were able to get a little bit more of a behind the scenes, if you will, of his life leading up to Hallow, the story of starting Hallow, and I think actually the story he tells about how they really made that commitment to starting Hallow. I don't believe that that's been shared, at least not on a podcast, so it maybe publicly in a conference or something, but I don't believe it's been shared on a podcast. After all, I did listen to pretty much all of his appearances. So I think it's a little bit of an exclusive, if you will. And then we get into some of the nitty-gritty details around how they actually financed the company in the early days and what it was like for them to leave their kind of cushy jobs to start a prayer app, right? So kind of radical transformation there. Then we wrap up by discussing their involvement at the Vatican recently, where they participated in a conference on how the church should approach technology and AI. I think it was mostly from an evangelization perspective that the church had pulled together this conference, and just really some very interesting insights there that they were able to be in the room, kind of surrounded by some leading minds in this space. So be sure to stay to the end for that, or if you really feel like it, feel free to just jump straight ahead. It's up to you. But if you are not already, please do follow in your favorite podcasting app so that you can get notified every time a new episode drops. That's all. All right, enjoy the show. What I'd like to start with is something you haven't really shared too much about, is your kind of the origins of your entrepreneurship life. So if I understand correctly, your family had some pizzerias and did some real estate, so kind of some entrepreneurship kind of influence there. But I guess, what were you doing to earn a buck back in middle school? What was your first hustle?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So you alluded to my first, my career, where I got started both in terms of studying and ultimately then, jobs after school, was actually in finance. So if you would have asked me in middle school or high school or college, do you ever want to be an entrepreneur? Do you ever want to start a business? My answer would have actually been no. So I actually started much more in the finance kind of investor mindset. So my grandfather was big, kind of like stock market guru type guy, not professionally, but just privately. And so conversations with him would always be around kind of the latest stock he was in or that kind of stuff. So as you mentioned, both my parents ran small to medium businesses. My mom, aunts and uncles ran pizza shops, and my dad and uncle took over and then grew a construction company that my grandfather started, and grew that into a real estate development and management company. And so I grew up around a lot of hard and manual work. Mm-hmm. And so I think more than anything, I learned during that time how to work hard. Whether that was in the pizza shop, although I spent a little bit more time when I was younger hanging around my grandparents who lived with us in and around the pizza shop. My cousins all worked in the pizza shop. I spent a little more time in summers and during the school year on the construction side with my dad, but all the older guys I was around would always talk about you decide you're too good for college? And everyone always encouraged me to really focus on academics. So I was much more academically oriented. So, to answer your question, the first consistent way I made money, I think, was altar serving. So that was probably a non-standard answer there, but in 8th grade, I was the lead altar server at Holy Name of Jesus Parish in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which primarily meant that I needed to make sure there were 3 servers for every funeral at the parish throughout the year, which meant I basically went to every funeral in the parish for a year and tried to find 2 friends. It was easy to find friends during school because you got out of school. It was harder when school wasn't in session. Yeah. But there was a tiering of the 3 funeral home providers, I guess. One gave the altar service 5, one gave 10, one gave 15. So we're always praying for the $15 funeral home. So I don't know if I'd consider that a side hustle, but service to the church that came with some economic
some perks.
benefits.
Yeah, I was talking to my brother. He served a wedding not too long ago, and they paid. And I was like, you got to be kidding me! I got paid to serve weddings. But that's awesome, man. Quick interruption, folks. I've got two asks for you. First, if you're enjoying the show, please share it with another current or aspiring Catholic entrepreneur. We don't have a budget for paid advertising, so this is the only way that the show really grows. And also, when you share it with a text message to somebody who is a founder or Catholic entrepreneur or aspiring Catholic entrepreneur, and you give them a little bit of a message that goes with it, it'll really help them to at least check out the first episode that you send them and hopefully get them hooked for more. Secondly, if you are interested in becoming a sponsor of Catholic Founders, reach out to me today, as we are looking for folks to keep this initiative running by financially supporting it and in a more substantial way. You can do so by emailing me, silasmaynor@gmail.com, or send me a DM on Substack. Either way works. All right, back to the show.
So I guess one thing is, why did you feel more drawn to the finance side versus the kind of the business side specifically? Just because of the maybe a greater exposure to your grandfather?
Yeah, so I think that cued in some initial interest. At that point, maybe in high school, academically, I was considering a lot of different things. So I would not say that I was set on finance kind of going into college. I knew it was one of the options. Early on, I got involved in some extracurricular activities at school. And some of the investing projects, I just was fascinated by the idea of, okay, we're a business, we're trying to grow, we have a new product, we have some competitive landscape thing, like what should we do? And kind of the open-endedness of being able to really think deeply about a complex adaptive system, being the world, or a competitive landscape, or a specific transaction, and trying to think through, like, okay, how do we create something that is bigger and better and serve more people over time? And just what felt like the incredible ability at the time as a college student to just sit down and not just read financial statements and the amount of information that the companies would release publicly, but go do primary research was one of the big things I learned at school. I remember one of the formative experiences I had. I was investing kind of with friends throughout college. Small amounts of money, but to give ourselves kind of real experience. And one of the stocks that I was looking at was Activision Blizzard, and the maker of, amongst other things, World of Warcraft. And at the time, their stock was down 20 or 30% because World of Warcraft was coming up to their kind of 10-year anniversary of being a franchise, and there was one quarter where a bunch of the subscribers declined. And so basically, the world started modeling whatever the subscriber count at the time, this thing is 4 or 5 million, was going to go down to zero, and extrapolating that and decrease the price of the company. I was a little bit surprised to hear that because that wasn't kind of the narrative around my friends, and so I started going around to GameStops in Northwest Indiana and like asking people, what do you think about Warcraft? Are we done? Are we moving on to the next game? And what I found this, in particular, this one clan master, so like these clans of players who leads these guys across the world, was like, no, they just had this one patch that was a little light on content. I fully expect like the next patch to be great. We're just like pause our subscription to save a couple bucks, for a couple months till the next patch comes out, and then we're all excited to come back to the next content. And so it's like, well, that's interesting. I started asking around. That seemed to resonate with people I was talking to. Ended up buying the stock, and then like the next quarterly release, after the next patch, the price like bounced basically right back up because it was not going to zero, and like made like 30%. I was like, wow, that's crazy to like think that you can go out into the world, have an understanding of what reality is, or what the future is in a way that's deeper or more accurate than other people. And that was just like a really, as a 20-year-old, felt like a really empowering kind of thing.
So that kind of led you down just wanting to pursue that further, and then kind of get into that space. You thought that would be the general future for you, is all finance?
Yeah, so interestingly, that got me into like finance generally. In finance, there's basically two big buckets of types of at least investing. There are at least two big buckets of types of things you can do. There's a lot of ways to break down different types of investing, but basically public market investing, i.e. stuff that's traded on the stock exchange or the bond exchange or mercantile exchange, or private market stuff. So buying stocks, that'd be public market stuff. And so the more I got interested in investing, the more I started doing that because that's what you can do as a regular person. I ended up really liking the thought process, the analytics, everything I just described, but I felt like something was missing in the sense of actually being engaged. It felt a little bit shallow to just because I could somehow try and know more and then passively buy the stock, and then just what I thought was going to happen happened or didn't happen, you could make money from that. That felt, and there's maybe some deeper theological things to explore there, but that felt shallow and unfulfilling. And where I actually ended up professionally after school was on the private market side of the world, in what's called private equity investing, where you actually buy a business. In the companies I was at, case, you own and control the business, and there you're actually making the decisions to how should we grow, how should we hire, what products should we expand into, what other companies should we buy, those kinds of things. And so a more hands-on approach is ultimately what got me more excited, because that felt more fulfilling. And then in an unexpected way, that ended up then transitioning into a much more hands-on approach on the entrepreneurship side, but thought that was going to be what I was going to do for forever.
Yeah, no, I think it's. I read a lot about these people who just they love finding out these nuances about the business. The Warren Buffett's going around getting information on the ground and then investing. But I just find the idea of all you're trying to do is stack up chips higher and higher to be kind of I wouldn't want to do that. I want to be in the weeds, building the business and everything. But I guess before so it sounds like you got a little bit more taste of the, let's say, kind of running businesses piece in a different view, I guess you could say, during your private equity time. Did you ever have thoughts of leaving before founding Hallow? Was that the first thing you guys decided you were thinking about leaving to do, or did you have other thoughts about entrepreneurship and leaving?
Yeah, I really did not. I thought that private equity investing is what I was going to do. I was on a path to go to business school and then kind of re-enter at kind of more senior level. And, the place that I was at, or similar places, were, 40 to 50, mostly guys managing billions of dollars. And, if you made it up the chain to be a partner at one of these places, you're owning your own plane kind of wealth. And that's what I thought I was going to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess it's really interesting that you ended up on the path of founding a prayer app then, because that's kind of very different than the other
Very
trajectory,
so.
Right? But God has His ways of working with us. So, hey, quick FYI, in the first episode about prayer, we heard a snippet of the following part of our discussion where Alessandro shares the background context of his prayer life leading up to Hallow. This is the full part of that discussion, so don't skip ahead too much. If you do, you're going to end up missing out on some of the inner workings of Alessandro's faith journey and how he was discovering his faith in a deeper way leading up to that experience of deciding to found Hallow. I guess leading up to that decision to leave and to found Hallow, I'm really curious. The point of this podcast I want to do with you is really understand the importance of prayer in the life of an entrepreneur. So what did your prayer life look like as you were discerning making that leap? Because you were really changing the trajectory of your life by doing that.
Yeah, it was, and I'll start a little kind of earlier chronologically and build up to it. Hallow's existence and proto-Hallow even becoming a thing was very much the result of me and my two co-founders and broader founding team of 6, which were basically just friends that went to college together, really trying to figure out how to pray. So it was the process of how can and should we pray that led to discerning a call to taking the things we were learning and going and help the world do the same things. So it was not I have a great prayer life and now I want to go share that with everyone. It was a stumbling along, trying to figure out how to pray, and then unexpectedly in that prayer being called to go teach others. So taking a step back, you mentioned grew up big Italian-American family. That meant I grew up Italian Catholic, sometimes in that order, as I often say, very culturally Italian and culturally Catholic, big sacramental parties and things like that. That meant Catholic grade school and high school, so I kind of grew up in the church and then ultimately college at Notre Dame. Was always involved. I mentioned altar serving, still going to Mass on Sundays and holy days, even throughout the whole Wall Street, New York, private equity, Chicago experience. Definitely coming in with ashes on Ash Wednesday, regardless of where we're traveling in the world. But I did not have a very vibrant prayer life at all, outside of Mass and maybe grace before meals and the occasional prayer before bed. What the trap I kind of fell into throughout later high school and throughout college was I gravitated much more towards the simply intellectual experience of faith more than the kind of discernment or surrender aspect of relationship with Christ. And so I always did really well in school, And so like I felt that because I was passing all the tests, or I could tell you all the things you wanted to know about the catechism or whatever, that like I got it. Well, in the same way that I was like passing chemistry tests, I passed theology. And so I allowed that to kind of box God into those factual statements, as opposed to a person with whom to have a relationship and a person to look towards to understand, what his will is for my life. And so that was kind of the state that I was in a couple years out of school doing the investing thing. It was really that was a often stressful life. So I was working literally 7 days a week, 90, 100-hour work weeks pretty consistently, traveling across the world. And so I was, stressed and starting to have some physiological challenges from like blood pressure stuff and otherwise. And it was actually my then best friend, now co-founder, Alex, who about a year or two before we ended up starting Hallow said, "Hey man, like you don't look so good. You should like try meditation." So he had gotten really into, and I'm getting a little bit of the kind of the founding story stuff. So redirect me if you went throughout this, but he had gotten really into secular meditation using an app called Headspace, mindfulness meditation, basically, deep breaths, body scanning, visualization stuff. And so I tried that almost every day for like 4 or 5 weeks. And the way I describe the experience is that it was helpful from a physiological perspective. If you sit still and breathe deeply, your heart rate is going to go down, which at the time I certainly needed. But as soon as I created those 10 minutes of space, of silence basically in life, all of these like big, what I would now call vocational questions started to pop up. Like, what are you doing with your life? You ever stop to think not what you want, but what God might be calling you to do? And that was a big, scary set of questions that I didn't really know what to do with. And most importantly, I did not feel like I had any time to try and figure out the answer to those questions. So I did the opposite of what you're supposed to do. Threw those big questions like into the closet, slammed the door, locked in, like ran as far away from possible about it. So I just basically ignored them, which again, not supposed to do, but that's what I did. Alex, in the meantime, had who had fallen away from his Catholic upbringing, fell in love, was getting married to an amazing Catholic woman, now mother of their 3 children, and was going through pre-K now, and in a very self-honest way was saying, hey, if I'm going to jump through all these hoops, to be married in the church, I might as well figure out, do I actually believe in God or not? And so kind of on his own, he's starting to dig into like, do I believe in God? How do I figure that out? Being a millennial man with a big question, he went to the source of all truth, which is, of course, YouTube, and was, like, does God exist? Proof of the existence of God. And he found people like Father Mike Schmitz, Bishop Barron, Scott Hahn, and was kind of energized again. It's like, okay, this is like serious intellectual stuff. Maybe this makes sense. But I also want the counterpoint. So we'd go out and look for the atheist point of view. Found people like Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, kind of new atheism. And he's like bouncing back and forth. He's like, oh, they also have a point. But he kept coming back to this idea in this intellectual back and forth that growing up he was always told you could talk to this guy, meaning God. And if you could have a personal relationship with him, then he must be real. So like, why don't I just talk to him? As if he had this like new idea in the history of the world, what great thought, but he didn't know how to have the conversation. So he's called a former rector of ours, Father Pete, and Holy Cross priest, and was like, "Yo, FP, quick question. I like meditation. I'm looking for something Catholic to see if God's real. Any chance there's something that connects those two things?" And Father Pete, God bless him, just laughed out loud on the phone and said, "Well, Alex, I don't know how many classes you slept through while you were here, but we've been doing this for over 2,000 years. It's called prayer, and you should really know how to do that." And so he said, "Okay, great. Tell me where to get started." He told him, "Okay, what you need to start with is Lectio Divina, meditative form of prayer that focuses on reflecting on Scripture and asking the Lord what He's revealing to you in a specific part of Scripture." So he goes, takes his wife's Bible off the shelf, opens a random page, grabs a paragraph, and it happens to be Matthew chapter 6, where the Sermon on the Mount, where the disciples ask, "Lord, how should we pray?" And the answer is, of course, the Lord's Prayer. The word that jumped out to him in that reflection was Hallow, from Hallowed Be Thy Name, and had this deeply transcendent contemplative experience, and broke down into tears, felt God's overwhelming presence in that moment, knew immediately God was real, and was committed to going and trying to figure out how he could love him back. So, being a management consultant who's like, I'm going to break down this market, goes and Amazon, buys like 16 books, I think, Ignatian spirituality, Carmelite spirituality, discernment of spirits, all the things, and just starts tearing in all these books. A couple Sundays later, he showed up to my house, my apartment at the time. As the Italian of the group, I would occasionally host Sunday dinners for the friends and girlfriends and wives. And he sits down and says, all right, man, you're Catholic. I got some questions. Which is, always a good start.
Loaded situation.
To a conversation. And just starts hitting me with all these questions of like, what is Lectio Divina? What is the Examen? How does, one do discernment of spirits? And just like starts hitting all these things. And I didn't know half of the stuff he was talking about, despite being this, A+ theology student. And he's like, you got to try this stuff. Now, this is like one of my best friends in the world who's sitting down, clearly having a passionate reversion to his faith. I'm like, all right, man, like I'll do this. Like, I'll do this with you. And he's like, you got to try this. You got to try this. Let me know what you think. And so definitely all credit to Alex on that front. So to finally get back to your question, what I started doing in that moment was I started doing Lectio Divina in the morning for 5 or 10 minutes on the gospel of the day. I never heard the word, well, I may have heard them, but I did not remember ever hearing the words Lectio Divina before. That was an entirely new form of prayer. And then I started doing the Examen in the evening, which equally I had never done before. I'd done examinations of conscience before, confession, but never a daily examen, reflecting on your day. And happy to talk more about each of those. And those two things clicked as the tools that I was missing to answer the big, scary questions that I had been running away from. Not like a really big, life-changing, like, what am I supposed to do with my life? Like, forget about tomorrow, forget about next year, forget about all the stresses of life. Like, here, now, today, Friday morning, what do you want from my life, Lord? What do you want from me? And that immediately clicked as both truly freeing and as a source of peace that I could not envision, once I had a taste of it, living without.
Hey everyone, quick interruption. I've got a couple of asks for you. If you're enjoying the show, please do consider becoming a paid supporter of this work by going to Substack. You can go to catholicfounders.com/subscribe and choose a tier that works for you. For paid tiers, you'll get access to some exclusive content as well as access to our paid community and to be able to speak with other Catholic founders in that. And that's all. Back to the show.
And so over the next couple weeks, we were, diving more into learning different types of prayer and doing different things. Over time, he's like, and we're having conversations literally at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning as I'm like walking back from the office. And he's in a different time zone at this point. And so, the books are stacking up on the shelves and the blogs and the emails are going back and forth. We're like, wouldn't it be awesome if instead of like keep buying all this stuff and trying to memorize all these things, we could be guided in the same way that these secular meditation apps we had used did, but for prayer. And we looked around, and there's some stuff on YouTube, but the ad experience was pretty disruptive to that. And so Alex, being a mechanical engineer, but had taken some coding classes, and Eric, our third co-founder, is a computer science guy. Like, well, it can't be that hard to like code like a play and pause button or record some friends. Just saying some of these scripts that we like, just to be able to have the prompts and then time the silence and all that kind of stuff. And so we did that just for ourselves. And over the course of a couple months, our friends and family were like, hey, it'd be cool if we could, try this thing out that you're apparently spending time on in your, 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. slot, which seems like important to you. We should, happy to try that out. And then over the course of a summer, it was pretty wild to see the things that started happening in their lives, from just committing to 5 to 10 minutes of this type of prayer, which is basically like 3 types of prayer at the time, Lectio Divina, the Examen, and the Christian meditation, which is kind of just a broad kind of reflective, recollective prayer. And we're just like shocked at that moment, and it kind of felt like a rock hitting us in the back of the head of like, hey guys, instead of thinking about what is discernment, why don't you like actually do some, and why don't you think about this? So we got together in the fall on a Saturday morning at Eric's house. Again, I was working 7 days a week, so I stayed in the office Friday night till 5 a.m. to try and like get ahead so that I could go out to the suburbs to his parents' house for a couple hours on Saturday. Went home, slept for an hour, took an hour-long Uber to his parents' house, showed up at like 7:30 for an 8 a.m. start. Obviously didn't feel great. And we got around the room and we started with 45 minutes of contemplative prayer, led by one of our friends from school who was a seminarian at this point. Now, I had gotten up early on, college football game days before, but not for 45 minutes of contemplative prayer, and certainly not after sleeping an hour and a half. And I felt like crap, but in that moment, I felt it was literally like a flip switched. It was like the closest one of 2 experiences where I felt like a true out of body, like spiritual engagement experience of like complete tranquility, complete serenity, and a call to like go help the world pray. And the next Monday walked in to my partner's office and quit to go help build a prayer app. So that was a little bit of a long-winded response, but it was basically not doing anything, getting a taste of how one could pray, and in that learning, feeling a call to go help others learn as well.
Yeah. You've answered a lot of the questions I would have followed up with, but I'll just kind of reflect on this for people listening. I think the really interesting piece here is you can't understand God's call unless you are praying, right? You have to be spending time with Him to hear Him at all. If you've got a friend who wants to talk to you, and every time they call you just hang up or you ignore their text messages, you're not going to listen to them, and they're not going to feel heard either. So if they're asking for help, you're not going to know. So I think that's really great version of the story. I've actually I don't believe you've told some of those pieces, so I'm glad we got that uncovered here.
Can I react to one additional thing?
Yeah.
The other thing, to use the friend metaphor, which I use all the time when we're talking to Catholic schools and families, my prayer life, to the extent it existed before that, which, on and off throughout life, was very one-directional. Mm-hmm. And I think part of the real revelatory moment and the kind of approach it towards relationship was the listening part, which I think sometimes we don't always spend as much time on. And so particularly that meditative and then contemplative posture in prayer was completely new to me, basically. And Alex tells a great story during this time. The marriage discernment stuff came out of confession, I don't know. He's talked about it. I think it was in confession, but then he's talked about it publicly, so we could talk about it. That he was talking about some issues in the relationship or whatever they're talking about, and the priest was like, Alex, let's do a visualization exercise. Let's say you come home from a long day, and you come in, you say, hey wife, quick update, pretty rough day, had to do all this stuff I didn't want to do, pretty tired, so I told you what I need to tell you, didn't cheat on you, so like, don't worry about it, I'm going to bed. How healthy of a relationship would that be? And he's, not great. He's like, well, what's missing? He's like, well, I'd probably ask her, like, how was your day? How are you doing? Right? And so realizing that in all relationship, but especially our relationship with our Creator and Father, listening is a pretty important part of that. And so that was part of the real light bulb moment that I'd missed previously.
Yeah. It's something I've been thinking about a little bit recently, which is just... I'm always trying to get more entrepreneurs, more wannabe entrepreneurs, if you will, to start businesses, because I think a lot of Catholics are like, they've got so many objections as to why. But I think that listening to, there's this, I forget exactly what verse it is, but it says Mary contemplated these things in her heart, and she spends a lot of time like thinking about these things. I don't believe that, especially as men, typically, contemplating things is not always the most natural thing to us. Like we just want to get things done, keep moving, and like you had said earlier, you kind of tossed this question that did pop up to you. You tossed it in the closet and walked far away from it. That's a tendency we have, but I always try to convince people that if you want to do your best to come close to God, which I think most people would say they do. You have to develop a habit of contemplating these things and spending time with God, because then you can know that there is a call to entrepreneurship if there is. So we'll fast forward a little bit here. Now that you guys are deciding to launch this, again, a big objection most people have in doing this is like, how am I going to finance building this company? So can you talk about financing Hallow in the beginning? Like, what were some of the nitty-gritty details of how you guys managed? Like, did you have to move in with your parents? Like, did you like eat ramen all the time? Like, how did you do this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Alex was in grad school, just starting grad school, getting his MBA. So he was in student housing in Palo Alto. Eric was in an apartment in downtown San Francisco. I was in an apartment in downtown Chicago. They'd recently gone to California from Chicago for a couple different reasons. We ended up all back in Chicago a few years later. We're now all in Chicago. But so we were kind of in different places. Alex's wife was teaching at the time, so teacher's income, student housing, studio, dorm apartment. Eric lived in like a half, I don't know, it's technically a room, but it was like a room in like the subterranean part of a San Francisco walk up with like a shower like in the hallway and some like other people down the hallway. I was in like a real one-bedroom apartment because I had just signed up a lease, so I was kind of stuck in that. We sat down on that Saturday where we were at Eric's apartment in the afternoon. We already felt pretty, the morning was pretty revelatory. And we're like, okay, this feels like, like we're going to do this. How can we do this? And we sat down and we penciled out like, okay, how long could we go without an income if we are willing to go like to zero? And I do not have as dramatic, and we do not have as dramatic a story as many entrepreneurs do, in part because we were coming from, they were both management consultants at a big three management company. I was from finance. We had a couple rounds of bonuses banked. No, none of us are particularly aggressive in our lifestyle. And so Eric and I were like, I think we could go like 3 or 4 years. Like if we really like pencil this out and stay pretty frugal. Eric, huge Costco guy. He's like, I'm like, okay, 3 Eggos for breakfast, two hamburgers in the afternoon. With this, we could do this. I knew that I'd have to switch apartments when my lease was up, but if it went that long. But we just sat there and like, okay, are we willing to go to zero? Yes. Alex in a little more complicated position because he was in school. There's student debt, so he took the early withdrawal penalty from his 401k, which is an interesting conversation with his wife. I remember between the three of us, because I had the most recent pay stub, they're like, okay, we're going to open like a credit card, but at that level of company formation, it's like a personal guarantee. So like my credit score now has the Hallow credit card on it, which was stressful. But we ended up going basically a full year for me and a little bit more than a year for them because they quit a little bit earlier than I did with like $0 of income. And so at that point it was just, what is the minimum we need to survive, and just focus on working as hard as possible to try and get stuff done. It was, Eric quit his job in the late summer, I quit my job early fall, and then next fall we ended up raising a seed funding round. And then after our first funding round, we paid ourselves a very small amount, but we started having some income. But we're like on, government insurance for that full year. I was looking 3 times before crossing the street. We each had a lot of airline and hotel points from our previous jobs with a lot of travel, and so we were maximizing that. We would often try and work together in person, and so I'd go to California. Eric would come from downtown San Francisco to Palo Alto. Eric is a like outdoor camper, so he is able to sleep on like the 1-inch blow up mattress thing. So he would sleep. So Alex and Megan, married couple, bed, studio apartment. Eric would be at the foot of the bed in like the 1-inch inflatable thing, and I'd be on the couch. There was 4 of us in the studio apartment, and Eric is a night owl, coder, and so, up 3-4 in the morning, lights out, just like white screen. So Megan, Alex's wife, to this day, still occasionally reports nightmares of she'll just be in a dark room and she'll just hear like typing, Eric's typing at night. So yeah, those were some of the super early days type stuff. Personal credit guarantees, no income, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's, for me, I've heard a lot of people talk about their decision to go, because people who are, they're not crazy. They think, okay, what does this mean? Like, what am I actually going to do about this financially? How am I going to provide for my family, etc. And as long as you visualize the worst case scenario outcome, you can usually say, okay, am I fine with that? Yes or no. Like, if I'm not, then I'm not going to do it. But if I am, like, I will. I had a friend of mine, or a mentor of mine, tell me, he had been married with kids already when he decided to start his own business, and he imagined, burning through his 401k, having to sell his house, move in with his parents, and he's like, I'm willing to do that for the potential upside, right? So I appreciate you walking us through that. To wrap up our conversation, I asked Alessandro about their involvement at the Vatican recently, where there was actually a conference to discuss technology broadly, but especially including AI as it relates to the missionary work of the church. Let's hear what he has to say. There'll just be one last topic I'd want to ask you about, because it's very unique to you and Hallow, is I guess I'll kind of phrase this as like the church in the digital age. So if I understand correctly, you participated in something at the Vatican regarding technology and AI. I'm just kind of curious to hear your perspective on what that was like, what was talked about, and if there's any, I guess, trajectory that the church is trying to go in that way.
Yeah, so there was a conference earlier this year in the fall of 2024, for those listening in the future, if the world doesn't totally implode over the next couple months or years. It was called the AI Builders Forum, and was hosted by a series of groups. It was hosted physically at the Pontifical Academy of the Sciences. The Gregorian University was the named host, at one of the papal universities, or the apostolic universities, and Magisterium AI, a faith-centered company run by a guy named Matthew Sanders, who was awesome, kind of coalesced this group. And it was people from across the world, with definitely a bend towards the Western world and the Northern Hemisphere, but people from across the world in a series of different groups, ranging from technologists, like Max Tegmark was there, famous MIT AI professor, technologists, academics / theologians, philosophers from places like Notre Dame or Catholic University or Oxford, and then investors and kind of capital allocators across the world. And it was around the question of what does the advent of AI mean for the church, and how should the church engage? There were also prelates, bishops, Cardinal Turkson was there from the Pontifical Academy of the Sciences, and a few priests from across the world. And it was a really interesting dialogue around all of those questions. I think I am very hopeful at the church's reaction of really wanting to engage in these areas of technology to help guide and inform our thinking on how we build these things, understanding that the building of things carries a responsibility, and that's true in all aspects of life. We sometimes forget about it when we get into super specific use cases, but there's a real teleology there, which is something we talked a fair amount about. We talked about things that are good to aim towards and things that are not as good to aim towards. One of the things that stuck with me the most from the conference was actually Max from MIT brought it up, Professor Tegmark. He said the church, when it has chosen to engage in new fundamental technologies, has a history of making really important contributions to the world. And the example that he used was in the area of bioethics. And said in the early advent of CRISPR technology, we drew a really clear line that says like human cloning is immoral and we should not do it. We should not advance towards that because that is a unordered result, a disordered result, which is an objective evil. And so let's not do that. Biomedical research and like all these other things, great. I think the parallel he would use would be like tool AI, good. Pursuit of super AGI, maybe more like cloning, and drawing a distinction of like what it is we're aiming for and what types of things we're aiming for would be bad. And I think kind of that framework of how the church can engage by being a moral compass and understanding the not just what we can do, which is freedom defined by the world, but what we ought to do and what we ought to aim for, the pursuit of true freedom, as the role of the church in these conversations. Mm-hmm. So I was both informed and found a renewed sense of hope that I think the church actually is interested in doing that. And I know, hearing and talking with Cardinal Turkson, that Pope Francis is very much engaged with this and has asked a few people to start looking into. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was some publishing on this topic coming out of the Holy See.
I was going to ask about that because I've been trying to work through Laborem Exercens, and there seems so many parallels of this idea of automation. Now you can kind of port it forward 40 years to AI. And I just constantly wonder about it because I feel that often the church has not, at least publicly, not to my knowledge, provided too much guidance on these things. And I really hope they do, because work is important for man. And if we take away all the work with AI, I'm not too worried about that happening. But I do think it's something that we have to be aware of and do intentionally. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Certainly some more topics to cover in the future. Maybe I got to get this guy from Magisterium AI on. I do have his app actually on my computer.
Very much happy to connect you. Matthew's amazing.
Yeah, so awesome, man. Well, really appreciate you coming on. Any, I guess, final things for the audience, or where you direct them to learn more about Hallow?
I would say, if you're interested in having learning some new things or building a daily habit of prayer, we'd love to help support you in your prayer life. It's HALLOW, as in hallowed be thy name, not Halo. We get that. Hopefully, if you use Hallow enough, maybe in the end you'll get a Halo, but no product promises on that front. We're available in 8 languages, 9 if you include Latin, English, Spanish, Portuguese, Polish, Tagalog in the Philippines, French, German, and Italian. We would love to serve you. I should also mention, you can download Hallow for free. There's permanently free content available forever. No subscription needed. That's really important to us from a mission perspective. There is an optional upgraded premium subscription you can pay for. That's how we make money. We don't sell any user data. We don't sell any advertising. It's really about you do get some extra content, but it's really about kind of investing in your prayer life and creating that skin in the game to help you achieve the goal that we all have, which is to pray without ceasing. I'll close with some user quotes. I have just pulled up some random ones here that come up literally in the last 2 days. Tina says, game changer. Daily use, Hallow is worth it. It will keep your Catholic family together by praying together. Constant flow of updating content. You can't get bored. You can also set a daily routine with reminders. This is a digital saint maker. Create a group with your family members. See what pastures they are grazing in. Great conversation starter. If you're not sure how to talk about faith, just tell them what you're doing or learning about in the app. Shout out, Tina.
Nice. I'll offer my own as well. I started using Hallow just like several weeks ago, I think. And the daily routine builder is amazing. The one thing I need to figure out how to do, maybe you can help me with this, is I need to get my daily catechism in a year to update to the next day every day, because I have to constantly find it and then search it.
You can do that, so we can talk about that offline. Yeah.
Sweet. All right, man. Well, it's a pleasure having you on. We'll definitely have to have you on again. And love what you guys are doing. Keep up the good work.
You keep up the great work. Really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to hearing future episodes of the show.
Thanks again so much for tuning in to this discussion with Alessandro. Again, if you are joining us for the first time, go back to episode 1 to hear his guide on how to pray as an entrepreneur. We go again through the very beginnings of how to discern whether or not you're called to entrepreneurship, the tools to use along the way, how to pray even when you are successful, and then how to pray to know if it's time to hang things up as well. Very, very important discussions. As a teaser for our next episode, barring any more last-minute inspirations, we will be speaking with Sondre Rash, the CEO and founder of a company called Safety Wing. We discussed quite a lot in that conversation, but I will just mention one of the main topics which I think is interesting is his thoughts on how to reconcile being a techno-optimist, something I consider myself, while also being a Catholic, right? I think there's just always this idea that we want to pursue this like
utopia type of world where everything is great and technology is really, really helping people solve problems. But also as Catholics, we have certain reservations about that. So the conversation is especially good if you are someone building a tech startup, or if you're just very interested in the dynamic of being Catholic and an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, because we talk a lot about this. So if you're somebody who just has zero interest in kind of Silicon Valley tech startups and how it works as a Catholic, probably not for you. If you're just more interested in your brick and mortar business, maybe not the right episode for you. But if you are interested in those things, this is definitely going to be very interesting. It's going to be the type of thing that you really, really enjoy. Last thing to leave you with is download the Hallow app and try it out. I really, really cannot recommend it enough. I personally am really enjoying the Daily Exegesis podcast that covers the gospel readings of the day. Just my kind of style, right? It's like 20-ish minutes that cover the gospel and what it really means in the literal sense. And then I also listen to the Catechism of the Year with Father Mike Schmitz. Cannot recommend enough. Father Mike's great. And then if you enjoyed the show, please follow in your favorite podcast player so you can be notified every time a new episode comes out. And then share with another current or aspiring Catholic entrepreneur who would like the content. Really, really appreciate you sharing this because that's how this grows. All right, until next time, God bless you and happy building.